You've probably been to the beach before, found a seashell, and thought, wow, that's pretty neat. But how much do you know about the mollusk responsible for making the shell? The mollusk whose corpse you are now holding. In this video, I'm going to give you a glimpse into the dramatic life that the mollusks behind some of Florida's most common seashells lead. Use this information to impress your friends, family members, or significant others. I'm Mr. Marfis, and this is The Secret Lives of Seashells. The first shell I'm going to introduce you to today is one of Florida's most common predatory marine snails, the knobbed whelk. Knobbed whelks are commonly called conchs, although they are not true conchs. I'll introduce you to a conch a little bit later on. Now, when you go to the beach, in the sand underneath your feet, it's sort of like the African Serengeti. There are predators and prey. The prey are usually bivalves, like this giant cockle clam. Usually there'd be two sides to him. He'd be closed like this. So he's sitting underneath the sand. The knobbed whelks can actually sort of like smell their prey. And what they do is they chase the clams all over around the beach underneath your feet. Once they catch them, they use the edge of their shell to pry the clam open. Then remember that they have a muscular foot that they use to move. They stick that muscular foot inside of the clam to further pull them open. And then they use their radula, that remember was like a tongue covered in spikes. They stick it inside of the clam, grind the clam up like a slushie, and then slurp them out. So when you find a nice bivalve shell like this, you're usually finding the murder victim of a snail like the knobbed whelk. The other cool thing about knobbed whelks is that sometimes we find their egg casings on the beach. This is a knobbed whelk egg casing. Each one of these little segments contains lots of little whelk babies, if this was alive, and they sort of secrete the egg case little by little by little. Each one of the little segments would have tons and tons of little knobbed whelk babies, but by the time they hatch, there'll only be a couple left, one or two left. They will have eaten all their brothers and sisters. A savage predator. We are now going to watch the largest predatory snail in Florida hunt, the same way that a knobbed whelk would.
So now, for this tulip snail, it appears safe to patrol the shallows in search of a meal. But is it? This is a rather bigger kind of snail. At 5 kilograms in weight, the giant horse conch has little to fear from any shark, and it has a taste for tulip snail. Sensing the approaching danger, the snail flees. But in a world of snail paces, the conch is something of a Ferrari. It calls for desperate measures. Exhausted by the effort of its last-ditch attempt, the tulip snail is slowly gunned down.
The shell I'm going to show you is my personal favorite, the shark eye moon snail. It looks like an eyeball, and it is also a big predator on the beach. It chases down its victims in a similar way that the knobbed whelk did. But when it catches its victims, it uses its radula to drill a hole inside of them. You can see this tiny Venus clam has a hole drilled inside of it. If you ever find a shell on the beach with a hole like this, it was the victim of a moon snail or another similar predatory snail. Same deal. He drills in with his radula, and they usually aim for the bivalve's little nerve cluster that's sort of like his brain. So he basically drills a hole straight into the clam's brain, and then once he's sort of incapacitated or halfway dead, he goes around the front side and then slurps out the clam inside and eats him. Moon snail's diet is not just clams. They'll actually cannibalize their own, as we can see from this moon snail who fell victim to another moon snail. The Florida fighting conch is one of the most common gastropod shells to find on our beaches. The Florida fighting conch is an herbivore. It just eats plant material, but it's cool because the males of this species will use a tubular projection called a proboscis to fight with each other. in order to win the love of the females.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening. But they fought with expert timing. There were funky Chinamen.
The slipper snail is an interesting shell. It gets its name because it has a little ridge on the inside. The animal would live inside of there, but it looks sort of like a slipper you put on your foot. They're interesting because they're hermaphrodites, and they form stacks on top of each other. The slipper snail on the bottom of the stack is the girl. All the ones stacked on top are boys. When the whole stack gets knocked over and the bottom one gets eaten, the female gets eaten, then the next slipper snail in line will transition and become the female, and then all the other males on top of her will mate with her. Lettered olive snail does things a little bit differently. This is a very fast snail, lays in wait just underneath the sand. When something comes by that he wants to eat, he pops up and quickly grabs whatever the prey with his giant muscular foot, wraps it up in a layer of mucus. That mucus he secretes will end up suffocating the prey. So he basically chokes his prey to death in his own mucus. Next are two closely related snails. This is called an auger. You may have found them on the beach before. They're very, very common. Augers immobilize their prey by stabbing them with a tiny venomous tooth. It's the modified radula. It's full of venom. It's sort of like a spear. Now the cone snail is a little bit rare to find on our beaches. This is an alphabet cone snail, but you can still find them. They're very cool because their venomous tooth radula has actually been modified to become a harpoon. They'll actually launch their little venomous tooth radula out at things that they want to eat and then sort of reel them in and eat them. This particular cone snail is not particularly dangerous to humans, but some of them in other parts of the world are and can actually kill humans. Here we see a similar cone snail hunting.
This siphon acts as a breathing tube and a warning. Emerging from the sediment is its owner, a 6-inch long toxic killer. The cone snail. Snails are usually thought of as slow, slimy, and delicious in a garlic butter sauce. But with some 40,000 different species of snails, a few are bound to buck the system. In the waters of Southeast Asia, this is the underwater version of a tank, with a hard spiral shell, flexible treads, and down in front, a cannon. It has eye stalks on either side, but it hunts primarily by scent, using its siphon. The target? A nearby fish. The fish hides deeper under the rock rather than swimming away. Bad idea. It still has room to move. But inside this probing tube called a proboscis, the cone snail has a long-range weapon, a harpoon. Made of modified tooth, the harpoon can be launched by a quick muscular contraction. Fish hunting snails are particularly dangerous, with venom strong enough to kill a human. This harpoon is cocked and loaded. Target is within range. The cone snail strikes. The fish is paralyzed within seconds, reeled back in, and swallowed. With a full belly, the cone snail returns under the sediment, its siphon peeking out as a reminder and a warning.